from the Gospel according to Mark, the 8th chapter, starting at verse 34, if you wish to follow along.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus called the crowd to him, along with his disciples, and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and of my words, in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the angels." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Christ.
The last church I served before retirement was named Old Goshenhappen Reformed Church. Yeah, everybody laughs when they hear that name. It was actually an Indian chief who controlled this one territory, and his name was Shakahapan, but the Germans couldn't pronounce it, so it's Goshenhappen. It's usually called Pennsylvania Dutch country, but really, that's a misnomer. It should be Pennsylvania Deutsch country, because there weren't any Hollanders there. They were Germans, many types of Germans, many different, they belonged to a number of religious groups, especially some that were being persecuted in Europe, such as the Amish and the Mennonites, or the Moravians and the Brethren. But there were also lots of Lutherans and Reformed people among them. This church that I served had been a union church. It was shared by both a Lutheran and a Reformed congregation for 250 years. During the 18 years that I was there, I learned a lot about this whole Pennsylvania Dutch culture and the traditions that were a part of it. Not far from where we lived, there was a museum in a 1737 two-story stone house called the Henry Antis House. And it fascinated me. I like to visit museums, and this was a museum. The floor plan was very different. The first floor was largely one big room that was the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, everything put together, because it had a huge hearth in it where they could do the cooking, and also it was one of the only heated rooms. The upstairs bedrooms were unheated. But just off of this big room was a very tiny room, just wide enough for a single bed and a little walking space alongside of it. And this was for the, well, in Pennsylvania Dutch, I call them the grootdaddy, the grandparents, grossfather, the sick, for a woman in labor, or for someone who was dying. Because it was warmer here. This is where, unlike the upstairs bedrooms that were so cold, this was heated by the big hearth. In this room, as I said, it was also, especially for those who were dying, was a tiny window. It was about 6 inches wide, 8 inches high, and it had a hinge on it, so it opened like a little door. And it really didn't give much light in this room, but the guide explained this was called a Seelenfenster in German, a soul window, because this is the room where people died. And when someone died, immediately the same offense, or the soul window, would be opened so that the soul could escape and go to heaven. Now, I don't believe a soul needs a window to return to God. But I was very touched by this little thing, because the walls of that house at that point were over 2 feet thick, stone. And it took a lot of work to build this little window in. And it said something about the builders. They had such a profound belief in the human soul that they made provision for it at the time of death. As I say, I don't think the soul needs a window, but I have to admire the faith of those who would build such an item into a house. We don't talk about souls very much today, do we? Soul's a common word that we all know, but don't really think about as much as we should. Many people who are materialists would dismiss the whole idea of each of us having a soul. You know, we're just bodies. When the body dies, it returns to the earth and the elements. And that's it. That's life. But Christians believe that we have an immortal soul, and we will stand before God in a different dimension of reality someday to answer for the condition of our souls. That word soul is used over 200 times in the Bible. It is an important word. Your soul is the spiritual part of you, the very essence of your being that for better or for worse is immortal. Jesus certainly believed in souls. We have some very serious warnings about the care of our souls. In today's gospel lesson, Jesus said, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" In Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." And then the story in the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus talks about a farmer who had a bumper crop, so large a crop that it wouldn't fit into his barns. And so instead of filling his barns and then giving the excess to the poor, he decided he would tear down his barns and build bigger ones so that he could hoard it all for himself. He said to himself, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." But that night God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself, but is not rich toward God." Have you thought about your soul lately? That's the question I want you to think about today. I've been thinking about my soul lately, perhaps because I'm not in the spring of my youth anymore. Also, we've been losing some friends of our own age. It makes you think, am I ready? Am I prepared? I've been reading a book called Are We Bodies or Souls? It's written by a Christian philosopher named Richard Swinburne, who taught at Oxford University in England. He answers his question in the title, Are We Bodies or Souls, by saying, we are both. The traditional view has been, yes, we are bodies, but we also possess an immortal soul, which is the most important part of us. He says this, and I'm quoting, "Our bodies may be very complicated machines, yet we ourselves are not such machines. but essentially non-physical beings, souls, who control bodies. Bodies keep us alive, and by enabling us to interact with each other in the world, make our lives greatly worth living. But souls are what we essentially are. By some miracle, we may continue to exist without our body, but no miracle could make it possible for us to exist without our soul. It's an interesting point. No miracle could make it possible for us to exist without our soul, because for each of us, our soul is the one essential part of us. Our soul is immortal. It can live forever, whereas the body dies. And the soul is to be valued above all things. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? There's some classic works of literature, stories, fictional stories about people who sold their souls for the whole world. In German, there's probably the most famous poem in German is Faust by Goethe. But it was a story that even preceded Goethe's time. The story of this brilliant scholar, Dr. Faust, who learned all that he could learn, all that the world had to teach, but he wanted more. And so he makes a deal with a devil called Mephistopheles. In exchange for his soul, he will be given magical powers which will enable him to do and experience all the pleasures the world has to offer. And he uses them, obviously, in horrible ways. There's an American version of that story called The Devil and Daniel Webster. It was made into a movie in the late 1930s. It's a story of a New Hampshire farmer who is so deeply in debt that he's going to lose his house and his farm to the bank. And what can I do? I will do anything to save the farm. And so he meets a creature called Old Scratch, who's obviously a demonic creature. He makes a deal, pay off the mortgage, and you can have my soul after 7 years. Well, nearing the end of the 7 years, he begins to fear for his soul. So he hires the best lawyer that New Hampshire has to offer, Daniel Webster. He's going to argue with Old Scratch for his soul. Richard Swinburne, that philosopher that I mentioned, offers a 21st century version of that story. He says, with modern medicine doing amazing things in terms of organ transplants, think about it, for years, struggled to find the ability to transplant a human heart. Now, kidneys, lungs, livers, even in one instance, a human face for someone whose face was horribly torn up, have been transplanted. And Swinburne says, are we approaching the day when we may actually be able to transplant a brain? Maybe not a whole brain, but maybe a brain that, if the patient has a serious cancerous tumor that can't be removed in one part of his brain, if we could transplant that part, remove that part of the brain and transplant a brain from a cadaver of someone who died in a car accident. The question is, after such a surgery, the person might look the same, the voice might sound the same, would have some of the same memories, but would have the memories of the other brain, the experiences of that brain, the attitudes, the beliefs of that brain. And Swinburne asks, yes, we may save a life, but would we be destroying a soul? Think about that. Would it be worth continuing to live if in the process somehow your soul were destroyed or seriously altered? I mean, developing our soul is the process of life. We're constantly shaping our souls. From birth and perhaps even in utero, our souls are being shaped by experiences, relationships with family, relatives, friends, teachers, things we read, experiences we have, and how we react to those experiences. You know, everybody reacts different. You know, one person could have some terrible missufferings, catastrophe of some kind, and they may come out of the whole experience just embittered. How could God let this happen to me? They're angry with God, angry with the world, angry with everybody. And other people will go through that experience and come out even closer in their faith to God and have much more compassion for other people who are suffering. Our souls are different, and a lot of times it's how we interpret what we're experiencing that shape our souls. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Everyone's born with a soul, and how we handle life experiences, the beliefs we choose, our faithfulness in living by those beliefs is a big factor in the shaping of our souls. I think of life in many ways as the time where we're shaping our souls. Even our sins, our mistakes, help to shape our souls, hopefully for the better, if we repent of them, confess them to God, and ask for His grace and strength to overcome them. We're growing. That's shaping our souls. When I think of shaping our souls or being shaped for the kingdom, I think of a couple I knew in a church I served in the 1980s. I'll call them Don and Barbara. For the sake of the innocent, we'll reserve their names. But Don and Barbara were very special people in that church. They were people with very strong faith. But they often rubbed people wrong. They had some rough edges to them. Don in particular was a very proud man, kind of a cocky attitude that really rubbed people wrong. Betty was a very, very sweet and humble person. She just would take anything that was thrown at her, and people would say, "Stand up for yourself, Betty." No. She was just very, very sweet. Don had reason for his pride. Right out of college, he got a job as a traveling salesman for a local company. And, you know, many people just see that as a stepping stone, but he took his sales very, very seriously. He traveled all over the country, even on his vacation, he would drag a trailer behind the car, and the wife and the kids would stay in the campground in the trailer. He went out and made business calls, and he more than doubled the size of the production of his company. And eventually, you know, he moved from sales to management and basically became the CEO and general manager of that company. So he had reason to be proud. And he did very good as a manager of that company. But he didn't own the company. It was owned by a wealthy man who had bought up several different companies. And after many years in that CEO position, the owner said, "I'm giving the company to my son." And this was a shock to Dave. Not that he ever expected to own the company, but the son he had dealings with many times. On behalf of his father, Dave had to go bail this kid out of jail when he was in prep school and in college. And he was basically a self-centered, rich playboy. And now he was going to be the owner of the company. Dave had as his business philosophy, he said, you got to know your people, hire good people, pay them well, treat them with respect, production will be good, the company will run well. The new owner, the kid, said, people are like machinery, they're just replaceable parts. If you can get someone cheaper, force them out, get somebody new in there. It broke Dave's heart. He said, finally, he tried to hold on to the job and hold things together, but he said, I just can't be there and watch the company that I spent my life building being destroyed. So he took early retirement at age 55. And as he predicted, the new owner bankrupted the company within 6 months. Lost all the contracts. The people that he'd sold to for years said, nothing's the same anymore, we're going to find somebody else. The people who had invested in stock in the company lost their money. The employees lost their jobs. But the owner, the new owner, was able to sell the building and the machinery, and it provided enough for him to continue in the lifestyle to which he was accustomed. And many people wondered if this wasn't his plan all along. That's all he really wanted. But at 55, Don couldn't find another job comparable. He had investments. He said, I'm comfortable financially. I don't really need to work. But he says, I've got to work. Work has been my life. I just can't stop working at this point in life. So eventually, he set up a little business for himself. He became the town handyman. You name it, you got a repair, he would come out and try and fix it. To go from CEO to handyman was a big step down. But he did it humbly. And he put on a good face. I mentioned the cocky attitude that Don had. When he was in his prime, he was king of his household. And he had a habit that drove me nuts. We'd be sitting at the table together, and, eating or just talking. And he'd snap his fingers. Barb, coffee. And she'd come in. Here's your coffee, Don. 1 sugar, cream light, just the way you like it. Tried talking to her. I said, Barb, that's demeaning, the snapping your fingers. Tell him to get his own coffee already. No, I like waiting on him. That's my role. I like waiting on him. Anyways, eventually we moved from that church. We've been there 15 years. We moved to another church, but we kept in touch with them. They were very special people in that church. And eventually, they had to, old age forced things upon them, and they had to sell their home and move to an assisted living facility. We visited them there twice. First time we could see that Betty's mind was slipping a bit. But the second time we visited, we learned that, well, she'd gotten out of the facility and was wandering around the city saying, I'm lost, can you find my home? Where you live? I don't know. So then she had to be kept, in a locked section of the home. And we visited there, and Don was there. Barbara was in what they call a jerry chair. It's like a big high chair with the table locks in. And Barb's mind had really deteriorated a lot with dementia. But it was a scene we can never forget, because Don was sitting there spoon-feeding Barbara. And when she spilled or drooled, he had a napkin, gently would clean her, wipe her, and he was spoon-feeding her, talking so gently, so kindly, and smiling. That was the last time we saw them. They passed away, both of them. But my wife and I often said, wow, they were both fitted for the kingdom. Their souls were shaped for the kingdom when they were ready to go. Pardon me. Our souls are being shaped for the kingdom. The important part of that whole process, though, is to remember that other people's souls are being shaped for the kingdom. We're all in the process of our souls being shaped, and we need to be patient with one another in this whole process, just as they must be with us. This lesson was so well put by C.S. Lewis, who I feel was the greatest Christian writer of the last century. And I'd like to close with a passage from his book called The Weight of Glory, in which he talks about souls. Not so much using the word soul, but talking about the immortal part of us. He says, it is a serious thing to live in a society of possible immortals, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror or corruption such as you meet is only in a nightmare. All day long, we are, in some degree, helping each other, or to one or the other of these destinations. This is his most famous motto. There are no ordinary people. It is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor's soul is the holiest object you encounter in this life. Amen.